part of, a few things like that in Geneseo. I'm going to list a few of them. He's village historian, town historian, acting president of the Livingston County Historical Society, chairman of the Triad Committee.
That's
Yeah. Well, I know that he's not even half, but he's coming here tonight to tell us about a fellow that he got interested in doing research on history, and it shows a little bit about my age. He said, "Did you ever hear of him?" I said, "Yes, I know him personally." And I think together we have some material that will interest you. David, it's all yours.
Thank you, Alan. It's always, as I keep saying, it's always a privilege to be back with you kind people, Joanna. Up until 2 days ago, I'm not making excuses, but I was flat on my back and was hardly eating anything, so tonight's meal was my big meal of the past week. And I think I'm a bit stronger, but I'll find out in the next few minutes. And I sort of feel that I am serving as a straight man for Avalon tonight, because he has a wonderful program here, including the motion pictures. Before we get into the subject, though, we know we go in the attics, and for years something might be sitting there, and all of a sudden we come up with a meaningful historic document. So only this morning when I went over to the county museum, I thought, oh, I'll just look through the file on spring water. Almost each one of the mill envelopes was empty. I looked very closely, and I said, this looks like something. And sure enough, this is an 1835 document to the town of Springwater, and it pertains particularly to lots 163 to 183 in range number 7. I don't know if that means anything to anybody here, but anyway, in 1835, the courthouse in Ontario County decided that a friend of ours, who really you'll recognize the name, Nick Van Campen, after he got done killing Indians, he became one of the noted surveyors of the area. I thought this was pretty interesting. They said, well, Van Campen made some surveying errors in the town of Springwater. Would you correct them? So, anybody would like to look, I don't know how they corrected them. But the second one, last week, when working on Geneseo 1900 to 1950, the third part of our Geneseo history, and going through the newspapers, and I know some of you do this kind of research too, and two Springwater women selected for the grand jury, March of 1937. And well, so what? You know, when you read the article, Livingston County had never had any women on the grand jury up until March of 1937. They had the headline of two Springwater women. They were, the March 24th article was Edith Norton and Vera Wheaton were qualified. Norton had been village clerk for 2 years. Mrs. Wheaton had been president of the school board. Okay, well, Livingston County was moving into the new age. Okay, but 3 weeks later, I followed it through and found that Mrs. Wheaton and Mrs. Norton had been removed from the grand jury.
Shortly.
There was a reason. The district attorney had gotten together with the county judge, and so apparently there was a case before the U.S. Supreme Court at that time, whether women any place in the country could serve on grand juries. The case of the mayor of Buffalo had been moved to Livingston County to get it out of the Erie County jurisdiction. They were afraid that if two women got on the grand jury, the Supreme Court overturned the ruling that women could serve, that all of their hard work would be gone, and that the mayor would get away with it. So, anyway, Mrs. Wheaton and Mrs.
Norton.
didn't go down in Livingston history. It's sort of interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to be very brief for my part of our tribute this evening to Ted. And as Havilah said, it's sort of like the story last week when I was sick in bed and doing some reading and thinking of the story of the three blind wise men. Okay, and we all know the story that they came up to the elephant and one identified, well, an elephant must feel like this, a hoof. Second, well, no, an elephant is a trunk. Third one, no, the elephant is a tail. Well, from the Geneseo end of Ted's story, when I started out, I won't go through the whole story, but about a year ago, a couple of women in Geneseo who had been very young in the 1930s came to me and said, well, we hear that, we know that there was a movie in Geneseo in 1935 at the Riviera Theater. We were all in it. Well, it doesn't sound too likely, but then I began looking around at what had been handed to me in the Geneseo files when I took over. Two little canisters, metal canisters, each one with the name of Ted Nash labeled on the outside. At that time, Ted Nash meant nothing to me. Should have gotten to have one right away, but didn't. So, just to trace a historic research story, we began looking at the film, and we called in a couple of film restorations. And as you look at this afterwards, you'll see this is very wide millimeter film. We had hoped that, well, maybe it was 35 millimeters, so we could still use it on an older projector, but wider than that. This is called newsprint. Newsprint, okay? So we began asking around Geneseo as to anybody with any clues to it. Sure enough, a lady who was in her deathbed about a year ago in February told her daughter to give Mr. Parrish a call because I have the Magnavox 35 millimeter, not Magnavox Junior projector that goes with that film. So, here Pandora's box has been opened up. We had one public showing in Geneseo, and naturally, people who remember, people with families, want to see, not, they have photographs like we all have, but a film strip kind of arrangement where you can go right through it and see your friends who are that age. You know, you get the feeling from Main Street, Geneseo, you get the picture. It's much more than just a group of photos that Ted Nash took. And as further I got into this, particularly through Havilah's research, and the more he tells me, I'm beginning to develop a theory. And, you know, when you see in a minute or two, probably 30 or 40 of the pictures that are part of over 300. Okay, and maybe you'll get an idea too. Was Ted Nash just out on Main Street, Geneseo on a Sunday morning, taking photographs with a camera like Havel brought along, or was he trying to tell a story? And my theory is that this is a philosophic photographic story. Ted Nash is actually an important part of Livingston County history with his photography for two reasons. Number one, he was associated with the Merrill, M-E-R-R-E-L-L, Merrill photographers at Geneseo. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of the family. Two generations of Merrills. You know, it's going back to 1885, with their photographic studios, then taken over by the son. I'll just read a couple of paragraphs that was written in 1989 by their granddaughter. They'll just give us a little picture of the quality of the photography that they've turned out. Just one show and tell here. In the 1930s, I'm going to mention the Farm Security Administration, FSA. One aspect of the FSA was to send young people out into the rural areas, I guess, to put them to work during the heights of the Depression. It wasn't CCC, it wasn't WPA. Mr. Robert Merrill Jr. took this photograph. If you have a chance afterwards, it's sort of fascinating. The girls dressed up, going out to work for probably a couple of weeks in the country in their best dresses. The boys we look at the baseball caps, well, they had their caps on every which way too, but what I'm saying is that Mr. Bob Merrill Jr. and his father, they were artists in their photographic way.
I have two pictures taken that in his studio.
Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
My husband and I, when we were going together, had our picture taken in '39. And then my wedding picture was taken.
Interesting. Would that have been one place where young couples went,
Yeah, we just
a
went in.
place?
Yeah, we just went in and asked him to take our picture. He said, sure.
Yeah. Huh.
Yeah.
Thank you. This are just two paragraphs from the granddaughter's memories of what we just heard. My special job on Saturday mornings was to sit on a stool in the studio while Grandpa Merrill tried different lighting techniques and angles. His camera, mounted on a tripod, had a black cloth on the back. We all know about those. He would grasp a metal plunger which activated the camera. There followed a flurry of changing wooden edged photos and plates, which had about some along. And then after taking a series of 50 photographs of his granddaughter, he let her go for milk and cookies. But the afternoon part is what fascinates me. There were some Saturdays that were very special. I call them coloring days, and all the action took place on a large dining room table. This was on Main Street in Geneseo. Grandma and Grandpa would sit opposite one another, each with an angled, opaque, centered box in front of them. The table held a multitude of paint tubes filled with every possible color, rectangular and circular marble palettes, a box of cotton and brushes, having from 2 to 20 pairs. You know, it's mind-boggling to me. The number of pairs made a difference. And And there, with the opera playing softly from the floor model radio in the front parlor, they would hand color, and tint the photographs taken several days
Wow.
before. Yeah,
Yeah.
isn't it something? Yeah, the craftsmanship, the art. This does, I wish I could say this directly has a relationship with Ted Nash, but the Merrill daughter married a gentleman by the name of Nash. But just yesterday I found that the first name was different. So my theory now is that they were perhaps, the Nash boys were brothers, and that Miss Merrill was, that Nash got into the Merrill family, the Merrill photography, through in that vein in becoming a master photographer himself. My last thing is I'm going to say, and again, this is all theory before we see the faces of Geneseo, is that you could look at them, and I think naturally we all think, well, wasn't that nice? You went out one Sunday morning in 1935, you went down the street in Geneseo, and was just taking pictures because he knew that he was going to splice them all together, that they would be shown at the Riviera Theater. He would get everybody in on a Saturday night. It was a good money-making thing with his little, developing them in his little Kodak City truck. My theory is that he, along with the Merrills, he was more of an artist. At that time, I mentioned the Farm Security Agency, FSA. Farm Security Agency was hiring photographers, young photographers at that time period, to document American rural life. But most of them, Walker Evans, of that nature, were photographers who had a social philosophy to what they were doing. Basically, they wanted to show that there were all kinds of people in America, that these people, no matter what they had to overcome during the Depression, that when you looked at their faces and generations to come, you would realize that they were meeting the challenges just like, everybody, so many people in America did. They were proud. Well, you get the picture. Okay, so this is my theory. And as we look, these are our film strips, okay, put together. As you look at some of the faces of Geneseo, be thinking, do you believe that he has more to what he did here than meets the eye? Was he grinding an axe? Did he have a philosophy behind it? Yeah. I'll have one. It's Killing the Lights. The one other public showing for the Faces of Geneseo took place about 4 months ago, and naturally the night before it took place, the bulb burned out after 67 years. Okay, what am I going to do? So my son was kind enough to take me to the main photography stores in Rochester, and we went to Roll Photographic on Hope Avenue. Believe it or not, they had a replacement bulb. It cost $85. But when the specialists at Roll saw the Magnavox, they were more interested in this.
Yeah.
Yeah, real antique. Again, this is all an education for me too. At that presentation, a gentleman came up to me and said, well, you know what this was used for in Geneseo? No, it wasn't used to show film strips. And have any of you, I had never seen anything like this, but related to car dealerships.
what-
They were.
Yeah, they were.
Yeah, it's more advanced than what that is, but it was the same type of thing. It had a nice little carrying case that went over the top of it. It had a film strip in it like you've got, and it had a turntable like you've got, and then it had a chimer in it.
Oh,
So when the bell rang, then you went to the next frame,
Huh.
and then the commentary went along with it on the record.
Oh, okay.
all
So
right.
that's what this was, the record.
That's what the record,
Okay.
at least that's what it was in our training part of it.
Yeah,
That was back in the 50s.
yeah, even the 50s.
Wow.
Oh, isn't it something? We all live and learn, thank you. Well, enough time for Havel, so.
Was that enough to fight off for you?
Pardon? Well, let's see. Okay, the faces of Geneseo, and I'll make some informal comments as we go along, hopefully we can see it.
Yeah, I'll just try that.
Can you see all right?
The other thing I found out from a specialist is this is nitrate film. So for 67 years it held up, but it doesn't like heat very much, so
Oh,
we'll move along quickly. yeah.
okay.
Sunday morning, 1935, in Geneseo. A young boy dressed up, perhaps going up the hill to church. The next picture, a family picture going Main Street at that time, things you can learn that had just been paved. But we're not interested in that so much. There were people on in Geneseo on Main Street at that time would work late the night before, maybe over in the salt mine. And there were what used to be called old timers, just standing around watching the well-dressed people as they went down the street. There was always emphasis on the latest new automobile that somebody was driving. And notice the photos he was taking. The well-dressed, maybe sisters in front of the newspaper store on Main Street. But then we switched back to faces. Switched back to Lower Court Street in Geneseo. At that time, almost completely Italian-American people, first and second generation. Ted Nash loved animals, so a lot of his photographs of this nature. Going well-dressed to the St. Michael's Episcopal Church. But then we switched back down Main Street to in front of St. Mary's Roman Catholic Church. But don't notice what Nash was doing. He was going to make sure he got in the wonderful new automobiles, even up to the depth of the Depression. And then coming up the hill to Main Street, or going back down, the hats. The young teenage boys who didn't know that in 3 or 4 generations there'd be boom boxes, there'd be everything that they could imagine. The well-dressed part of Geneseo, again, perhaps some normal school students. Faces of Geneseo, the styles. But then we switch back as we conclude to the different faces of Geneseo. Again, a very well-dressed young Italian-American, as you can see, who was on his way. And there were other things going on that Ted Nash wanted us to know about. There was going to be a baseball game as soon as the last church was over with. We have some tough ball players ready to go out to the field next to the armory. We have the pride of people who are probably young men who are working 6 days a week. They're lucky pulling in $15 or $20. They were well dressed as they could be on Sunday morning. And then he ends up by going down the hill on Court Street. And we get a different picture altogether, don't we? The Orlando family is one example, living in one of the small clapboard houses. Look at the expressions on their faces, like Ted Nash made sure he recorded. A couple of younger women who probably had a good, their first job, well dressed, they were on their way. The faces of Geneseo boys who went on to be teachers, lawyers, bankers, but it was Ted Nash with his great talent for catching these faces. This was Joe Matata, longtime postmaster in Geneseo. Of course, a couple of pieces of watermelon after the game was a big deal. Off to the side of the house with a little shed out in back, right on Court Street in Geneseo. A little girl content with the tricycle. That face, probably first generation immigrant, Joanne's Pike. Kids, Lower Court Street. I don't want to get too hot, but I think he became a lawyer. Finally, at the tennis court,
Yeah.
Sunday afternoon in Geneseo, we see two brothers. And we wonder, well, why was Ted Nash, why did he take his time to photo like this? Well, these were the two Sims boys, black Americans living in Geneseo. The study he made of them, just standing there, tells a story in themselves. So perhaps you disagree with me, but I feel that in just the frames that we've seen, that our Ted Nash, who we're going to hear a lot more about in a moment from Pavlov, was a genius, was a man who understood Livingston County and left us with a story of brave faces of all kinds, and that was America. So that's my part of Ted and Geneseo. Thank you.
Can you see her? Pavla, do you need lights or help with anything?
I think I'm beyond help.
You want that screen down now?
Yeah, that was,
Can you see?
I don't have the best equipment in the world. Probably I have the ports, and you may have to suffer through this. And David started putting together this documentary on Ted Nash. I put together what I had from some films and made a little documentary, and it's pretty well self-explanatory. Unfortunately, the quality isn't going to be as good as I'd like. So let me get